Now this morning, as I swap out the battery chargers here, I'm trying to figure a way I can use this day to the best effect. It's right on the cusp of freezing. We're probably going to have our first frost of the year. And what I've been trying to do is one part at a time, bring one part at a time up to the base white coat. And we've been real successful about doing it, and I'm trying to save leaving a tank for last because I like to run the bikes. And what I do it was my experience from having a small plane for many years, that in the winter months you'd run the engine once every 2 weeks or so. And I'm not sure what the purpose of that was, but I know people put different things in gas tanks over the winter. I don't do any of that. What I do is once every 2 weeks I just run all the bikes, bring them up to temperature, let them sit there for a few minutes, and that seems to work for me. And I don't put any fuel tank additives in at all. And also all through the winter I try to get short rides in, a couple hours here, a couple hours there, so the bikes never really sit unattended for well, for too long of a time anyway. But we are really having some cold weather here. I can't wait to get down in the shop and start working. And because I get up early and I start work early, if I get done, and if it warms up to say even to 40 degrees, I try to get a short ride. If it doesn't warm up, I work a couple hours extra in the shop. So back down in a nice warm 65 degree shop. Now I wanted to share some information some people may not totally understand about paint drying. I leave the parts in the garage that I painted the day before overnight and bring them in, but they still smell. Now we try to keep the smell to a minimum because of miles, but anything that's been out in the garage overnight, when you bring it back into the warm area, it'll dry quicker when it's warm, it takes longer when it's dry. We're not going to be using these parts today, so it really doesn't matter, but just general information that may be of value. Now the second panel I haven't started. The first one I have the back part done. I break down the panels into the front, the structural part, and then the outside, the cosmetic part. Well, we try to work around when we have time and when we're able to do some of this dirty work outside, or we have to do it inside with paint remover, one or the other. Now another thing I may do on this, I haven't bought the yellow paint yet. I have to go down, but I may, as we get these days when it's freezing cold outside, I may do some of the paint trim, because the more of it I can get ahead on, then when I do get the yellow paint, I just have to paint the yellow, and of course then I can see what this is going to look like in real time. And I'm excited to do that, of course. And when you can still smell paint, sometimes you can smell it a couple days later in cold weather, that's called outgassing. It means there's chemicals in the paint that haven't really gotten out into the atmosphere yet, and that's just, in the summer the paint dries so much quicker. In the winter here, I always like to let stuff dry an extra day. And then I always try to break down the day and say, well, it's really cold in the morning, so if I have something I can do inside in the morning, something I can do outside when it warms up, maybe it'll go up to 40 degrees today from 45 or so. So now with the coffee down, it's time for figuring out what part of this is going to be the most productive to work on. Haven't thought about it for a few minutes. I think I'm going to take this piece and try to strip some of the paint off it here while it's freezing outside. So on a big part like this, what's supposed to happen, sometime it does, sometime it doesn't, because you don't know. In this case, the paint, this is paint I put on there, but there's certainly stuff underneath it. But this is what you're supposed to do, and all paint remover, I've tried all different brands. Some are a little better than others, but this is certainly an okay brand. You're supposed to put it in one direction and then not go back and wipe it. Now this is the only purpose of doing this is to save being outside in that 30-degree weather. If I can, and if I can't, I'll just have to bundle up like Santa Claus, I guess. But now in a perfect world, you would not go back over this. You just go once. I'm going to leave this dry about 15 minutes. I have other stuff to do. But the more you rush it, it just seems like you're fighting yourself. And if you have a nice the bigger the brush, the better. And obviously we'll see if this is our lucky day. Now some days it seems like the paint comes right off relatively easily. Some days it fights you. And if it warms up a little bit later, we can't get all of it off this way, we're going to be going outside. And we'll just have to tough it out. But I always like to see if, in the beginning of the day, if it's my lucky day, and I'll just let that sit. I can see it's already, in fact, let me show it without a camera cut. Let me take this off tripod. It's already starting to bubble up. So see, the trick is not to touch it. And I'm just going to let it sit there for 10 minutes. Because you can go back over it 2 or 3 times, but you want to let the paint remover do the work. And every one of these paint removers I've used is different. And some of them, the real powerful ones, they can melt plastic. I've had plastic parts melt, so got to be careful. These are fiberglass. This should be no problem at all. Now again, about 10 or 15 minutes, or if you read the label, and God forbid we should read the label on anything. If you let this sit and you're patient, a lot of times you can get a lot of it off and without a lot of work. And sometimes I've had paint that absolutely will not come off. Some of the paints that they use are just really difficult to get off. Now, to be honest, I painted one airplane, a real airplane, in my life. And I worked with some people that had professional equipment and professional paint remover. And the stuff was so smelly, it was unbelievable. Of course, we were in a confined area. And I remember getting sick from the smell of the paint remover. But it was a long job, and we did it. Now, just for reference, that was my plane for about 7 years. 2833 Hotel, an air coupe, a 47 air coupe. And look how handsome I was years ago. Wow. And to be honest, sometimes I work with paint remover, and I'm so sick of it, I'm willing to go sand outside. And some days I go to take paint off. I don't know what the secret is. And some days it's very easy to do it. So we're just going to see here about 10 minutes from now. So it's time to see. Now, there are a couple things. If you're doing plastic parts, these scrapers are not a great idea because they gouge the plastic. Gel coat usually doesn't get damaged by it, but it's a good idea to go gently. And let's just see if that paint comes off. Now, that would tell me that we're not going to really have a terrible problem getting this off, but the final little bit always has to get sanded off. So, and all the curved areas and all the little scoop areas. But maybe it is our lucky day. Thing is, once I start doing this, and this stuff does have a smell, but this is not one of our babysitting days. So if this were a babysitting day, I wouldn't have a choice, because I don't want to have my grandson exposed to these fumes and everything. But I would say right now, this is looking pretty good so far. You never want to get too happy when you're doing this kind of stuff. Yeah, it looks like most of it's coming right off. But again, I'm not gouging it. I'm just almost like shaving it off. So it looks like I just have about 10 minutes of work here to do this gently and see how much of the total amount of paint. Now, to do this, I'd need several sheets of sandpaper, that's for sure, and maybe more. Now, another thing, when we do this, it's going to be a problem if I have to do the gas tank this way. When you go over Bondo, this tends to just dig right in because Bondo isn't as strong as gel coat, of course. But I'm just going to do this real carefully, take my time. It's a lot more fun being in here than it being outside. But that's about how that's working out today. So far, so good, but you never really know. Now, once I get this first layer off, then I have to evaluate what's left on there and how I'm going to get it off, because obviously you have a work window here, and I don't know how long it is, but you don't want to let this sit overnight or something. To take a break. This is tedious work. Now we've got a good amount of it off. Actually, we got it more than I thought would come off. That's probably about $20 worth of sandpaper I've saved right there. Now once I get to this point, Sometimes you need 2 coats, sometimes you need 3 coats. You never know. But I want to brush this on, and I'm just going to let this sit now. And this should loosen up, hopefully loosen up even more of it. And I'll be able to wipe the rest of it off with a paper towel. About as much as we're going to be able to get off with paint remover, so I can just put this in the garbage, vacuum up, and the rest of it I'll have to do with sandpaper, but I've really minimized the amount of sandpaper I'm going to have to use. That's for Now, it's very important when you do this sanding with 600 grit with a power sander, I don't want to go unnecessarily through the gel coat. Gel coat is relatively thin. It's only a 60, not even a 64th of an inch thick, and it has no strength. So I don't want to remove any more material than I have to. I want to turn it from, this is the last little bit, and this is smooth, and this is ready for hand sanding. And that'll take a lot of time. I want to get around all the edges, all the corners. A lot of the spots I'll have to do by hand, but the flat areas like this, I can do with the power sander. But not to remove any more of the gel coat than you have to. That's the secret. Now, in an effort just to keep the dust down in the shop, and this is the part I don't like to do in the house, it's warmed up to, oh my God, it's coming up on 40 degrees here. And this will only be about 5 minutes to do with the power sander. Now, getting that machine sanding done outside, boy, that saves a lot of dirt and grit and dust and vacuuming. But now there's always spots on it where you can't really, you have to get these little areas in here. I have to get this all by hand. There's always some little corners, edges that you just can't get with a power sander. But we have all of this flat. Really haven't removed all the gel coat, and I was hoping I wouldn't. There's a couple spots where I went through, and there's a couple of places where there's little cracks, like right here. Wherever there's a crack, I'm going to put some thin CA and just let it dry. Now, once you have the gel coat, you're down into the gel coat, you can see where all the spider cracks are. And the spider cracks are in the gel coat. They're really, the paint itself is not the issue. These gel coat spider cracks, if you look at any old Corvette, you see it. Now this, I want to get down in those cracks. And what I'm going to do is, because a lot of these, wherever there's spider cracks, I'm going to put an extra coat of epoxy inside. I can see that these parts are really, see the track day parts, they're very, very thin. And that's great, you save a little weight, maybe you go a little faster or whatever, but the problem is if you're looking to make a bike that you're going to keep, it may not be your best friend. Anyway, big crack in the gel coat up here, and this is thin CA now, not thick. You just put it on, open up the crack. Doesn't matter how many times you have to do it. It doesn't mean it's never going to crack again, but it sure stacks the deck in your favor. Because the last part of this is we're going to have to do some hand sanding and then get that first coat of primer on and let it dry overnight so we can sand it and detail it out. But anywhere there's a spider crack, now I'll keep in mind this is where I have to put a little reinforcement, especially right here. I see that's like it looks like somebody shot a bullet at it. This, I just want to hand sand, paying a lot of attention to get all the edges radiused. And this will take a couple hours because I'm really going to be fussy about hitting all these corners and edges and angles. Now, from looking at the spider cracks, I've identified where I need to put a little more reinforcement, and I noticed these parts already have 1, 2, 3 reinforcements. So I'm going to be really generous about putting a reinforcement in here. This is where we had all these spider web issues. Now I do have some scrap from one of the recent jobs I had, and it's just a question of I want to make sure I have a piece everywhere that there's an issue with those spider webbing. I think that carbon fiber patch is going to be critical reinforcement, because we had spider webs here, here, here. This should spread the load, and in fact, maybe at some future time while I'm waiting for things to dry, I'll put a coat of that structural resin on top of that just to make it even stiffer. But what that buys me is now this piece, this is where the spider web was. You could push your finger down and it was like an oil can. Well, now it's nice and solid. See, because these were, you got to keep in mind, these were track day parts. They were made to be super, super light, and all you do is put stickers on them and stuff. But I'm trying to make them into street bike parts, so I really want that paint job to be perfect when I'm done. So the next step is mix up some wet sanding liquid, get some 400 or 600 paper, and get this all ready for prime. So remember, the most important thing, of course, with all of the sanding is the radius, all the edges. Anything that's an edge, whether you do it with a block or by hand. When I'm done with this, I'll go over the whole part by hand. It looks like the day is plenty sunny out there. I'm going to try to get my 3 coats of primer, 20 minutes apart, if I can just get motivated here. It's been basically a whole day to get the paint off of this, but what that's done for me is stack the deck in my favor that as long as I own this motorcycle and every day I ride it, every day I enjoy it, I'm not going to look down and see cracks in the paint. And it's still probably half the weight of a factory part. The plastic parts that come when you buy a sport bike, no matter what brand it is. Hey, 3 coats of primer on that. I'm not gonna take a chance and try to rush this. In fact, what's happened, it's up over 40 degrees now. It's a blue sky day. I'm gonna try to get a short ride in. Put this out in the garage and let it dry. Once it dries overnight, bring it in the house and we ready to wet sand it. I think what's gonna happen is there's still a couple of flaws on there. I'll sand them out and we'll be ready to paint the white the next session. And this time of year, I try never to miss a day I could get a ride in. I just checked the ambient temperature there, and we're up at 40 degrees, but at 40, I like to have my electric gloves working. Boy, are they ever worth their weight in gold on a day like today. So how nice is this? The primer is drying, the bike's warming up, and there's still a few leaves on the trees. We may have a nice scenic ride today. Who knows? So isn't it great, while all those parts are drying, the primer's drying, my coffee cup's drying, we're out getting a free ride in today. What a beautiful day this turned out to be. Well, it looks like we snuck in a ride on a beautiful day. Cold, but really nice. Still some nice leaves around. And, oh my God, the fairing blew over to the other side of the driveway. I put it there. Anyway, hope you enjoyed sharing our ride, sharing our restoration, sharing our life. And thanks for watching.